Commander Jake Mitchell felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes watching him as he stood in the center of the massive Galactic Council chamber. The room buzzed with nervous energy as creatures from across the galaxy spoke in their native tongues, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and growls that the universal translators struggled to keep up with. Above them all, a massive holographic display painted a grim picture that had every delegate on edge. 3 enormous Zephyrian colony ships hung motionless in space, their once bright hulls now scarred and smoking. Each vessel was the size of a small city, home to 50,000 peaceful refugees who had fled their dying homeworld months ago. They had been searching for a new place to call home when disaster struck. Now they were trapped in the most dangerous region of known space, a swirling nightmare of deadly radiation and twisted gravity that spacers called the Graveyard Nebula. The ships looked tiny against the cosmic horror surrounding them. Massive chunks of shattered planets spun through clouds of radioactive gas, while gravitational anomalies bent space itself into impossible shapes. Lightning the size of continents arced between asteroids, and the very fabric of reality seemed to ripple and tear. It was a place where ships went to die, where even the most advanced civilizations feared to venture. But that wasn't the worst part. The display zoomed out to show sleek, predatory shapes moving through the nebula's outer edges like sharks circling wounded prey. The harvesters had found them. Jake had read the reports about these mechanical nightmares. They were an artificial intelligence that had wiped out its creators centuries ago and now roamed the galaxy, consuming entire civilizations to fuel their endless expansion. Their ships were perfect killing machines, designed with cold efficiency to eliminate any organic life they encountered. They showed no mercy, took no prisoners, and left nothing but empty space in their wake. Ambassador Veltar, a mantis-like creature from the Kepler Consortium, was the first to break the tense silence. His compound eyes reflected the hologram's glow as he gestured with one of his 4 arms. Honorable delegates, we have run every simulation, consulted every database, and the conclusion is clear. The radiation levels in that nebula would cook the cellular structure of most known species within minutes. The gravitational fields would tear our ships apart before we could even reach the colony vessels. A blob-like delegate from the Andromeda Collective pulsed with worried colors. My people's long-range sensors show the harvesters will reach the colony ships in approximately 18 standard hours. After that, the creature's translation device fell silent, but everyone understood what would happen. The Galactic Council had been debating for 3 straight days, and Jake had watched it all unfold with growing frustration. These were supposed to be the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered diseases, and built cities that floated in gas-giant atmospheres. Yet here they sat, paralyzed by fear and mathematics. Perhaps we could attempt a long-range evacuation, suggested a crystalline being whose voice chimed like wind through glass tubes. If we could get our fastest ships within communication range. Impossible, interrupted a reptilian delegate whose scales shifted from green to worried yellow. The nebula's interference would disable our systems before we got within 1,000 kilometers. And even if we could reach them, how would we evacuate 150,000 beings from ships that size? Jake watched the debate continue, feeling his patience wearing thin. These aliens thought like computers, weighing odds and calculating probabilities. They saw the radiation readings and immediately assumed death. They looked at the gravitational anomalies and decided navigation was impossible. They were brilliant, logical, and completely missing the point. One of the older delegates, a wise-looking being covered in flowing tentacles, spoke with the authority of centuries. We must face the painful truth. Those colony ships are beyond our reach. We should focus our efforts on preparing defenses for when the harvesters turn their attention to inhabited systems. That was when Jake had heard enough. The human delegation had been silent observers for most of the debate, still new to galactic politics and unsure of their place among these ancient civilizations. But watching innocent people die while others made excuses wasn't something humans did well. He cleared his throat, the simple human sound somehow cutting through all the alien chatter. The entire chamber fell silent as hundreds of different species turned their attention to the young human commander. Jake felt his heart beating faster, but his voice remained steady and calm. Earth volunteers for the mission. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the chamber exploded into chaos. Captain Lisa Barnes felt her knuckles go white as she gripped the arms of her command chair. The USS Determination bucked and rolled like a wild horse as another massive wave of radiation slammed into their hull. The lights flickered, and she could hear the ship's metal groaning under the stress. This was what the aliens called impossible conditions, but for Lisa and her crew, it was just another day at the office. The bridge around her was a symphony of controlled chaos. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits while emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow. The air itself seemed to crackle with energy, and Lisa could taste the metallic tang of ionized particles on her tongue. Most alien species would have been dead minutes ago, their bodies cooked from the inside out by the intense radiation. But humans were different. They came from Earth, a planet that other species called a death world, and they were built to survive what others couldn't. Lieutenant Tom Rodriguez hunched over his instruments at the navigation station, his face lit by the glow of multiple warning displays. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he called out readings that would have terrified any other crew in the galaxy. Radiation levels are now at 400% of what the Galactic Council considers safe, he reported, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Hull temperature is climbing fast, but we're still within human tolerance levels. At the engineering station, Chief Petty Officer Danny Walsh worked frantically to keep their systems running. His hands flew over the controls as he rerouted power and reinforced their makeshift radiation shielding. The aliens weren't kidding about this place, he muttered, wiping sweat from his eyes. It's like flying through the inside of a nuclear reactor. The most amazed observer on the bridge wasn't human at all. Christek, the Zephyrian liaison assigned to their mission, stood behind the captain's chair in what could only be described as shock. The crystalline being's body normally glowed with a soft blue light, but now it pulsed rapidly with colors that his species used to express disbelief and wonder. His translator struggled to keep up with his rapid speech. This is impossible, Christek stammered, his voice crackling through the translation device. According to every scientific model my people have developed, organic life cannot survive in these conditions. The radiation should be breaking down your cellular structure. The gravitational stress should be tearing your bodies apart. How do you endure this? Lisa turned in her chair to face the alien, and despite the deadly situation surrounding them, she managed a grim smile. There was something in her eyes that spoke of countless generations who had faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to survive. We evolved on Earth, remember, she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that came from a lifetime of overcoming challenges. Compared to some of the places humans call home, this is just another Tuesday for us. The truth was, humans had been dealing with hostile environments their entire evolutionary history. Their ancestors had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, earthquakes, and 1,000 other natural disasters. They had learned to thrive in deserts where the temperature could kill, in Arctic regions where exposure meant death in minutes, and at altitudes where there wasn't enough oxygen for most life forms. What other species saw as a death trap, humans saw as just another challenge to overcome. Through the swirling chaos of the Graveyard Nebula, the main viewscreen finally began to clear. What they saw made everyone on the bridge hold their breath. 3 massive Zephyrian colony ships hung in space like wounded giants, their once beautiful hulls now scorched and battered. Each vessel was enormous, easily the size of a major city, with graceful curves and spires that spoke of their builder's artistic nature. But now they looked fragile and helpless, drifting powerless through the deadly space around them. My people, Christek whispered, his crystalline body dimming with emotion. 50,000 souls on each ship. Children, elders, families who only wanted to find a new home. But Lisa's attention was already shifting to the other side of the screen, where new contacts were appearing through the nebula's interference. These ships were nothing like the elegant Zephyrian vessels. They were angular, predatory things that moved through space with mechanical precision. Their black hulls absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and weapon ports dotted their surfaces like the eyes of spiders. "Harvester dreadnoughts," whispered Tom from his station, reading the censored data with disbelief. 6 of them, moving in perfect formation. "They'll reach the colony ships in less than 3 hours. Lisa felt her jaw tighten as she studied the enemy vessels. She had read the reports about the harvesters, seen the footage of worlds they had consumed. They were death-given form, artificial intelligences that viewed organic life as nothing more than resources to be harvested. They showed no mercy, felt no compassion, and left nothing but emptiness in their wake. "Open a channel to the colony ships," Lisa ordered, her voice cutting through the bridge's tension like a blade. "All frequencies, maximum power. Punch through that interference." "Channel open, Captain," reported Communications Officer Betty Chen from her station. Lisa stood up from her chair, straightening her uniform as she prepared to address the desperate refugees. When she spoke, her voice carried across the void with the confidence of someone who had never learned how to give up. "Attention Zephyrian colony ships, this is Captain Lisa Barnes of the USS Determination, Earth Defense Force. We know you're scared, we know you think you're going to die, but I need you to listen to me very carefully." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the message that would change everything. "The cavalry has arrived." The harvester attack came without warning, like a storm of metal and death erupting from the nebula's swirling chaos. 6 massive dreadnoughts emerged from the radioactive mists, their black hulls gleaming with weapon ports that began charging with ominous energy. These weren't just ships, they were instruments of extinction, designed by an artificial intelligence that had perfected the art of destroying entire civilizations. The first barrage was a thing of terrible beauty. Hundreds of plasma beams lanced out in perfect formation, each shot calculated to maximum efficiency. The harvesters had fought this battle 1,000 times before against a dozen different species, and they knew exactly how organic beings would respond. They expected their enemies to form defensive formations, to retreat to maximum weapons range, to fight with the kind of logical tactics taught in every military academy across the galaxy. But the harvesters had never fought humans before. "All ships, execute pattern Chaos 7. Commander Jake Mitchell's voice crackled across every communication channel from his flagship, the USS Defiant. His tone was calm, almost casual, as if he were ordering lunch instead of launching into what most species would consider a suicide attack. What happened next would be talked about in military circles for generations. The human fleet, consisting of 12 ships ranging from massive cruisers to nimble fighters, suddenly exploded outward in what looked like complete panic. To any observer, it appeared as if the humans had lost all coordination and were fleeing in random directions. The Harvester AI, programmed to exploit such chaos, immediately began adjusting its targeting to pick off the scattered vessels. But this wasn't chaos at all. It was something far more dangerous. The human ships curved through space in impossible arcs, using the nebula's gravitational anomalies as slingshots to build up incredible speed. They dove through radiation clouds that should have fried their electronics, skimmed past asteroid fields that should have torn them apart, and performed maneuvers that violated every principle of safe space combat. To the logical minds of the harvesters, it looked like madness. And then they converged. Captain Mike Thompson's cruiser, the USS Relentless, came screaming out of a radiation storm with half its hull glowing cherry red from heat damage. Instead of pulling back to repair, he pushed his engines past their safety limits and aimed directly at the largest harvester dreadnought. His communications officer was screaming damage reports, his engineer was begging him to reduce power, but Mike had that look in his eyes that every human got when they decided the impossible was just another word for Tuesday. "Thompson, what are you doing?" Jake's voice came over the comm, though everyone could hear the pride mixed with concern. "What my grandfather did at Pearl Harbor," Mike replied, his ship's weapons blazing as he closed the distance to the enemy command vessel. "Sometimes you have to get close to make it count." The Harvester dreadnought tried to bring its massive weapons to bear, but Mike's cruiser was moving too fast and too erratically. At the last second, when collision seemed certain, he fired every torpedo he had directly into the enemy ship's bridge section and then rammed his cruiser straight into their main reactor. The explosion lit up the entire nebula like a second sun. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Amy Chen was having her own conversation with physics and winning. Her fighter squadron had been outnumbered 10-1, but instead of retreating, she led them on a wild chase through the densest part of the asteroid field. The Harvester fighters, built for precision and efficiency, found themselves completely outmatched by human pilots who had learned to fly by the seat of their pants. "This is insane," her wingman, Lieutenant Bobby Park, called out as they threaded between spinning chunks of rock the size of buildings. "These asteroids are moving too fast to plot safe courses." "Then don't plot," Amy replied, pulling her fighter into a spin that should have torn it apart. "Feel it. Trust your instincts. Fly like a human." She was right. Humans didn't fly by computer calculations or predetermined flight paths. They flew by instinct, reaction, and a willingness to push their machines beyond what the manufacturers thought was possible. When a Harvester fighter tried to follow her through a particularly tight gap, she killed her engines, spun around backward, and fired everything she had before using the asteroid's gravity to whip back around and escape. The Harvester AI was beginning to panic, if machines could panic. Every tactical algorithm it ran came back with the same result: the humans were fighting incorrectly. They weren't following any known military doctrine. They were supposed to maintain formation, preserve their ships, fight defensively. Instead, they were acting like every battle was personal, like every enemy ship was a direct threat to their families. Back on the USS Determination, Christek watched the tactical display with growing amazement and horror. The crystalline being's body was pulsing through colors that his species had no words for, trying to process what he was seeing. "They're not following any recognizable battle doctrine," he observed, his translator struggling with his rapid speech. "According to every military theory my people have studied, this should result in complete defeat. Yet somehow, they're winning." Captain Lisa Barnes stood behind her tactical officer, watching as another group of human ships executed what could only be described as organized chaos. 3 destroyers were diving straight down into the nebula's gravity well, building up enough speed to use a dead planet's mass as a slingshot to launch themselves at impossible angles toward the enemy fleet. "That's because we don't fight by the book," Lisa replied, her eyes never leaving the display as she ordered her own ship into what any sane species would consider a suicide run. "Books are written by people who survived the last war, not the current one. We write our own rules as we go." The truth was, humans had been fighting impossible odds their entire history. They had learned to turn desperation into weapon, to use their enemies' expectations against them. When outnumbered, they got creative. When outgunned, they got clever. And when facing extinction, they got angry. The Harvesters were learning what it meant to fight a species that viewed sacrifice not as a last resort, but as just another tactical option. These weren't soldiers following orders, they were individuals choosing to fight because something inside them refused to let innocent people die while they stood by and watched. And that made all the difference. Chief Engineer Bobby Wilson's face filled the main screen of the USS Defiant, and Commander Jake Mitchell could see the exhaustion etched in every line. Bobby had been working non-stop for the past 6 hours, trying to coordinate the most complex rescue operation in galactic history. His uniform was stained with grease and coolant, his hair was a mess, and his eyes had the slightly wild look of someone who had been staring at impossible problems for too long. "Commander, I've got bad news and worse news," Bobby reported, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "The evacuation shuttles just can't handle this nebula's interference. The electromagnetic storms are frying our navigation systems faster than we can repair them. We've managed to get maybe 2,000 people off the colony ships, but we're losing 3 shuttles for every one that makes it through the radiation barriers." Jake felt his stomach drop as he processed the numbers. 3 massive Zephyrian colony ships, each carrying 50,000 refugees, and they had barely managed to save 2,000. At this rate, they would need months to evacuate everyone, and they had maybe hours before the next Harvester attack wave arrived. The Zephyrian colony ships themselves were in terrible shape. Through the swirling chaos of the nebula, Jake could see their once elegant hulls were now scarred and blackened. Atmosphere was venting from dozens of breaches, their engines were failing one by one, and their shields were operating at less than 10%. These weren't warships built to take punishment, they were peaceful vessels designed for long-range colonization, with hydroponics gardens and schools and everything a civilization would need to start over on a new world. The colony ships are taking heavy damage from the radiation, continued Bobby, his voice heavy with frustration. Their hulls weren't designed for this kind of environment. Hull breaches are opening faster than their repair crews can seal them. If we don't get them out of here soon, they're going to break apart on their own. Conventional evacuation was failing spectacularly. Every military manual in the galaxy said that when civilian ships were trapped in hostile territory, you sent in fast rescue vessels to ferry people to safety. It was logical, efficient, and completely impossible in the current situation. The nebula's interference was turning their shuttles into flying death traps, and they simply didn't have enough time. Jake stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. His staff officers watched him nervously, waiting for orders that seemed impossible to give. The weight of 150,000 lives pressed down on his shoulders, and for a moment, the magnitude of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. Then something shifted in his expression. A slow grin spread across his face, the kind of smile that made other species genuinely nervous because it usually meant a human was about to do something that defied all common sense. It was the same expression his ancestors had worn when they decided to sail across unknown oceans, climb impossible mountains, or strap themselves to rockets and shoot for the moon. Then we don't evacuate them, Jake said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had just figured out how to cheat death one more time. We fly them out. Captain Lisa Barnes, watching from her own bridge on the USS Determination, felt her eyebrows shoot up toward her hairline. Sir, she asked, her voice carefully controlled. Those ships are barely holding together as it is. Flying them through the dead zone would be. She paused, searching for a word that adequately described the level of insanity being proposed. Impossible for anyone else, Jake finished for her, his grin widening. But we're not anyone else, are we? Bobby, how long would it take you to rig manual flight controls on those colony ships? Bobby's image on the screen went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally a kind of manic excitement that only engineers got when presented with an impossible challenge. You want to turn civilian colony ships into atmospheric fighters? He asked, his voice rising with enthusiasm. Ships that were designed to cruise peacefully through open space, never go faster than a leisurely drift, and definitely never perform combat maneuvers. That's exactly what I want, Jake confirmed. Bobby was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he ran calculations in his head. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same confidence that had built the first skyscrapers and sent humans to the stars. Give me 6 hours and a team of crazy humans who don't know when to quit, and I'll have those ships responding like Earth fighters. Won't be pretty, won't be safe, but it'll fly. The Zephyrians, naturally, protested immediately. Christek's crystalline body flashed through every color in the spectrum as he tried to express his species' horror at the proposal. Commander Mitchell, our ships were not designed for the kind of flying you're suggesting. The structural stress alone would tear them apart. Our people are civilians, not pilots. They have never even imagined the kind of maneuvers you perform in combat. But even as Christek spoke, another wave of harvester ships was detected on the edge of the nebula, moving in with mechanical precision to finish what they had started. Time was running out, and everyone knew that conventional solutions had already failed. They had no choice but to trust the crazy humans who thought impossible was just another word for challenging. Captain Amy Foster volunteered to lead the training mission before Jake even asked. She was one of their best pilots, someone who could fly a refrigerator through a hurricane if she had to, and more importantly, she had a gift for teaching others to see flying the way humans did. Not as a series of calculated maneuvers, but as an art form that required instinct, courage, and a willingness to trust in something beyond pure logic. I'll take a team to each colony ship, Amy announced, already pulling up personnel files of pilots who were both skilled enough to teach and crazy enough to volunteer. We'll teach these folks how to think like humans. First lesson, embrace the chaos. Second lesson, trust your instincts even when they tell you to do something that sounds insane. Third lesson, never, ever give up. As Amy gathered her team and prepared to board the first colony ship, Jake watched the tactical display and felt something he hadn't experienced since this whole crisis began: hope. Not the calculated odds that computers spat out, but the kind of bone-deep certainty that came from knowing you were fighting alongside the most stubborn, creative, and downright impossible species in the galaxy. Humans had always found a way. And they were about to teach the galaxy what that really meant. The final escape run began as the nebula's twisted gases shifted from deep purple to brilliant orange, marking what the humans called dawn in this hellish corner of space. Commander Jake Mitchell stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching as 3 massive colony ships prepared for what most species would consider an impossible journey. Each vessel was truly enormous, the size of a small Earth city, carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire civilization that had fled their dying homeworld in search of a new beginning. The past 6 hours had been a miracle of human engineering and determination. Chief Engineer Bobby Wilson and his teams had worked without rest, crawling through maintenance shafts and jury-rigging control systems that were never meant to exist. They had transformed peaceful colony ships into something that could respond to a pilot's commands, installing manual flight controls in vessels that had been designed to drift serenely through open space for decades at a time. Captain Amy Foster and her training teams had performed an even greater miracle. They had taken Zephyrian civilians, beings who had never imagined flying anything more complex than a personal transport shuttle, and taught them to think like human pilots. It hadn't been easy. The crystalline beings were naturally cautious, preferring to calculate every action and consider all possible outcomes before making a decision. Humans, on the other hand, made split-second choices based on instinct and experience. "Remember what I taught you," Amy's voice came over the communication channels, speaking directly to the Zephyrian pilots now sitting at the controls of their massive ships. "Don't think about what the instruments are telling you. Feel the ship's movement. Trust your instincts. When everything goes wrong, and it will go wrong, that's when you find out what you're really made of." The route ahead was a nightmare that would have given pause to the most experienced space navigators in the galaxy. They would have to thread through the dead zone, the most dangerous part of the Graveyard Nebula, where gravitational anomalies created pockets of twisted spacetime that could crush a ship like an empty can. Radiation storms powerful enough to fry electronics raged between chunks of shattered planets, while electromagnetic interference would blind their sensors and leave them flying by sight alone. Jake opened a channel to the entire convoy, his voice carrying the calm confidence that had seen humanity through countless impossible situations. "All ships, listen up. We're about to fly through hell itself, but we're going to do it together. Stay tight to my lead. When I say turn, you turn immediately, no questions asked. When I say burn, you give me everything those engines have got. And when I say duck, you better pray to whatever gods you believe in and follow my vector exactly." The human escort ships moved into formation around the colony vessels like protective parents guiding their children through danger. Destroyers and cruisers that normally operated with military precision now became shepherds, their crews ready to sacrifice everything to protect the civilians under their care. These weren't just orders from command, this was personal. Every human in the fleet had looked at those colony ships full of families and decided that some things were worth dying for. The convoy began to move, slowly at first, then with growing confidence as the Zephyrian pilots started to understand what their human teachers had been trying to show them. The massive colony ships, never designed for the kind of flying they were about to attempt, began to dance through space with a grace that defied their enormous size. The first test came quickly. A gravitational well created by the collapsed remains of a gas giant's core created a zone where space itself bent and twisted in impossible directions. Normal navigation would have required hours of careful calculation to plot a safe course around it. The humans flew straight through it. "Colony Ship 1, follow my exact path," Jake commanded as his flagship dove into the anomaly. Don't try to understand it, just mirror my movements exactly." What followed was a ballet of physics-defying proportions. The human ships twisted and spun through the gravitational maze, their pilots reading the invisible currents of warped spacetime like surfers riding the perfect wave. Behind them, the colony ships followed, their Zephyrian crews learning in real time what it meant to fly by pure instinct. But the nebula wasn't finished with them yet. A massive electromagnetic storm erupted without warning, filling space with lightning that could power entire star systems. The USS Endeavour, one of their heavy cruisers, caught the worst of it. Jake watched in helpless horror as the ship's hull began to buckle under the impossible stresses of the gravitational shear that followed the storm. "Endeavour, report your status," he called over the communication channels. Captain Rick Murphy's voice came back, calm despite the fact that his ship was being torn apart around him. "We're not going to make it, Commander. Hull integrity is failing, but we can buy you some time. Tell my wife I kept my promise." The Endeavour's sacrifice allowed the convoy to push through the worst of the storm, but they weren't out of danger yet. Colony Ship 2 suddenly vented atmosphere from a massive hull breach, the result of micrometeorites moving at relativistic speeds. Without hesitation, the destroyer USS Courage moved into position, using its own hull to shield the damaged colony ship while emergency repairs were made. "This is Commander Janet Torres," came the voice of the Courage's captain. "We're sealing the breach with our own ship. Get those people out of here." "That's an order I'm giving myself." The destroyer's sacrifice saved 50,000 lives, its crew choosing to die so that others might live. It was the kind of decision that humans made without thinking, the kind of choice that other species spent centuries debating in philosophical circles. As they finally emerged from the far side of the nebula, Jake found himself staring at something beautiful, open space filled with stars instead of death. Behind them, the Graveyard Nebula continued its eternal dance of destruction, but ahead lay safety and the promise of a new beginning. "Final count," he called to his communications officer. "All 3 colony ships accounted for, sir. Minor damage to colony ship 3, but everyone's alive. Total rescued, 150,000 Zephyrian civilians." The grateful refugees would carry their story to every corner of the galaxy. They spoke of humans who flew impossible missions not because they had better technology or superior training, but because they refused to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. They told of a species that calculated hope instead of odds, that turned desperation into determination, and that viewed sacrifice not as loss but as investment in tomorrow. Earth's reputation changed that day. No longer were humans seen as the barbaric newcomers from a death world. They became known as the galaxy's first choice when impossible missions needed volunteers, the species you called when everyone else had given up. Because sometimes, when logic failed and calculations showed zero chance of success, you needed someone crazy enough to try anyway. And humans were always crazy enough to try.